Welcome everybody to Lawrence Heritage State Park. My name is Rich. I'm the summer interpreter here, or tour guide. I give the museum, or some of the museum tours, the walking tours, and the boat tours as well on the Merrimack River. So I want to welcome all of you to today's Bring Your Own Lunch presentation. As you may know, we have these every Wednesday during the summer from 12 noon until around 1 o'clock. The schedule we have one more. So after today, we have one more for July on the 31st. And then the August schedule, for those of you who might be interested, is on the orange flyer out on the back table there, all right? And there's some of those flyers downstairs as well, if any of you would like to join us for any of the August presentations, okay? So, again, thank you all for coming today. Today we have, today's speaker is Joe Ponte from Andover. He is a friend of the park, part of the Friends group. You're on the board of directors, I believe, of the Friends group as well, right? And Joe is retired. What was your line of work?
I work for Lucent Technologies.
Lucent Technologies
Director.
in North Andover,
Yeah.
director there, okay. And Joe now in retirement gives public presentations to various groups. Today he will be talking with us about his memories of Lawrence, growing up in Lawrence, as a lot of us have or did, right? Okay, so Joe will share his particular memories of growing up in the city with us today. And when Joe is finished, of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And if any of you have some of your own stories or memories, as I'm sure a lot of us do. I grew up on Prospect Hill here in Lawrence. So if any of you have anything you would like to ask or share when Joe is done, please feel free to, okay? So Joe, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rich.
Okay.
I'm so pleased to see the bunch of you here. This is wonderful. I hope that I'll be able to relate to you. I'm going to go back 70 years into how Lawrence was in the 1950s, but we'll feel free to ask questions, okay? My military background, I went to the Coast Guard Academy down in New London, and they gave me motivation to really look into a lot of things about the sea and the ocean. And when I retired from Lucent Technologies a million years ago, I can't believe it's over 20 years ago, I took up writing. I always liked to write, and I've written numerous articles about nautical subjects, okay, about sailing ships, about lighthouses and all of that. And after writing, I got into the point of converting a lot of those articles into lectures. And I've given lectures around New England on various subjects. One day somebody said, Joe, why don't you sit down and see if you can recall your days as a kid in Lawrence. I lived in Lawrence until I was 17 years old, and then I went to the academy, and I never came back. I ended up in Methuen and then in Andover. But I really have some wonderful memories of this city. It's a great city, and I hope to share some of them with you. And let's get started. But by way of background, I'm second generation Sicilian. My grandparents were both born in Sicily. My paternal grandfather and my maternal grandfather and grandmothers were all born in Sicily. And they came to America right at the turn of the century, 1900 and such. They raised a number of children. My father, Thomas, was born here in Lawrence in 1910. And that got me to thinking, okay, 1910. We had the Bread and Roses strike in 1912. Okay, a lot of you know about that. And I said, 1910, if my father was born, they was definitely living in Lawrence in 1912. Both of my grandparents grandfathers worked in the mills. My mother's father worked across the street. He used to haul big there was a stevedore hauling the big bales of wool that used to come in from New Zealand, and my fraternal grandfather worked at the wood mills on one of the looms. So I said, they must have participated in the Bread and Roses strike, okay? So that was my history with them. So without any further ado, let me get started about growing up in Lawrence. I sat down one day, and that's what I do. I still use the old legal yellow pad to write. I can't type directly onto a computer, into Word. So I have to write it out first in cursive. Can you guys do cursive? You can. How do you sign your name on your driver's license, credit cards? You gotta learn how to do that, okay? So I have to write it out first, and then I put it into Word, and then I have a couple of devil's advocates that I send it out to for critique. My youngest daughter, who works at the Portland Press Herald, she's a devil's advocate, and I'd sent her. She lives in Portland. And I said, Amy, would you kind of see if you can do a little tweaking on this? And then she'd come back and say, Dad, did you ever take English in grammar school? Where did you invent these phrases? And she would clean it up. And then I'd send it to one of my colleagues to verify the truthfulness of this, okay? And finally I'd get it, and I'd send it out. You don't get anything when you publish freelance, okay? But I sent it out to various magazines, and every once in a while I'd hit and they'd publish it, and others they didn't. Come right in if you guys want to join us. Okay, so let me start, okay? Growing up in Lawrence in the 1950s gave me many fond memories. The whole city was my playground that rivaled Disneyland from the experiences it provided. A fat-wheeled, no-gear-shift Schwinn bicycle gave me the freedom to roam far and wide with my friends. Summers were especially fun for me. Swimming pool like Geisler's up on Prospect Hill or Kennedy's near Central Catholic. I think Geisler's exists, but Kennedy's is gone. Offered a great place to duck the heat. However, you had to remember which day was boys' day and which was girls' day. Basic lessons on how to swim came at the Y, and it dispelled any fears about jumping into the deep end. Holy Rosary Grammar School no longer exists. There's a building on Summer Street, big brick building, right in the middle of Summer Street. Holy Rosary Grammar School was the epicenter of meeting one's friends to explore and enjoy the city. The Lawrence Common, Prospect Hill, Tower Hill, the Reds, the stadium in South Lawrence, Hills and Searles Pond and Methuen were some of our favorite haunts. So with a bike you could go anywhere, and your parents didn't worry. The rules was come home when the street lights went on, and you went wherever you wanted during the day, and you were on your own. Friends who lived around Holy Rosary School were summoned with a few yells from their backyards. The alleyways which crisscrossed the city were the shortcuts and back roads to anywhere you wanted to go. Movie theaters were a must for Saturday afternoons. Theaters like the Central on Oak Street, the Warner on Amesbury, and of course, Movie Row on Broadway created the weekly dilemma on which one to patronize. Most kids stayed away from the Star Theater and the Premier Theaters because of the urban legend about rats that scurried up and down the aisles as soon as the lights were dimmed. Now, if you spell the Star Theater backwards, spell star backwards, what does it smell? Okay, all right. Movies were everybody's flying carpets to Fantasyland. The weekly menus there started with 4 cartoons. This is before TV, remember, guys. Started with 4 cartoons, a Three Stooges short before the main feature. Sometimes there was even a double feature. For 50 cents, you had enough money to get into the theater, buy a bag of popcorn, a candy bar, and enough money left to buy a popsicle for the walk home. Movies like Back to Bataan, Sands of Iwo Jima, Ivanhoe, and others served as backdrops for games that we played after the show. The walk home from the movies usually included a stop at the Lawrence Common to play on the swings, get a drink at the water fountain, examine the 4 World War II memorial cannons, and of course, use the subterranean men's room located across from City Hall. It should be noted that this facility was filled in during the rehab, I think in the early 60s, and it remains under 20 feet of earth. But it's still there across from City Hall. I'm positive that hundreds of years from now, archaeologists will dig up the site, and for sure, the place will still stink as it did in 1950s. Summer delights were always a visit to the beach, also known as Salisbury Beach. I remember driving up the old Route 110 and catching my first glimpse of the roller coasters and proclaiming we had arrived. It was there. It was, if there ever was a place for kids' heaven, it was the center at Salisbury Beach. The roller coasters, the derby horses, the tilt-a-whirl, and of course the penny arcade were activities one never forgot. I remember going to the Frolics to see a fellow by the name of Julius La Rosa, a genuine Italian superhero, with my folks and aunts. A super Nirvana event was it if your folks rented a cottage for 2 weeks at Salisbury Beach. Daily visits to the center are a function of how much cash you had or managed to stash away. The days flew by begging the question, why was summer so short when I was a kid? The next thing you knew, you were marching back to school under the watchful eyes of Sister Margaret St. Henry, Sisters of Notre Dame. Today, grammar school seems like a blur. However, the nuns made good use of the free slave labor of the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade boys. Daily chores like unloading and delivering cases of milk to each classroom, returning the empties to the street, sweeping the classrooms at the ringing of the last bell, were intermingled with the filling of inkwells, emptying waste paper baskets, and setting up chairs in the auditorium after lugging them up 3 flights of stairs. The theme song for the day was Onward Christian Soldiers. And who could forget Christmas plays at the high point of the holiday season? No provisions were made for gymnasiums in the school, but it didn't stop anybody from playing around on any free moment we had. The back alleys in the Lawrence Common were our playground. Students either walked home for lunch or brought their own sandwich. Most of us kept an eye open during Sunday dinner for that last field cutlet that was destined for Monday's lunch. Roasted peppers and olive oil were on the menu for Tuesday, and of course, tuna fish and olive oil sandwiches, the only meal allowed on Fridays. Lunch was usually wolfed down in 2 minutes so as to maximize playtime available during the noon break. Games like outs, handballs, eggs, relivio, hide and seek, sidewalk tennis, and buck-buck competed for our time. Girls in grammar school were really not a big part of our lives, except for a few secret crushes. I think I still have them, but I think the girls that were in grammar school are all dead now, so I don't know what to do about that. Luckily, lunch was usually wolfed down. Oh, wait a second. Winter brought us with sledding and snowball fights. Places like the reservoir provided a challenge, but any hill would do. Snowball fights grew to epic size. The girls in grammar school were often our primary targets. However, there were certain unwritten rules about throwing snowballs. You never throw it at cars. Buses were okay, but below the windows. And trailer trucks are okay to do, but not the cab. You could use the body. Those were the rules for throwing snowballs. I remember the time the girls were chased back into school and the entire 7th and 8th grade boys after being pelted with snowballs by them. I also vividly recall Sister Justina coming out of the main door and said, "Now you boys stop that." She was met with a hail of about 30 snowballs, which peppered her. The snowball tribunal was held that afternoon with Sister Superior presiding as she handed out punishment after punishment. You were probably part of that group, Joe. High school hit me like a big piece of pie. I entered the first time a multi-ethnic school. About half of my grammar school class went to Central Catholic or St. Mary's High School. The rest went to Lawrence High. With this partition, I gradually lost contact with some of my childhood friends. But on the upside, during the next 4 years, I made some lifetime new friends at Central. St. Mary's was staffed by the Sisters of Notre Dame and provided a smooth continuity for the girls. Central had the Marist brothers, who provided a well-disciplined educational experience. Nobody really stepped out of line and became a discipline problem. If you did, something like a wet bag of cement from a tenement house would fall on you and definitely straighten you out. 4 years at Central Catholic built long and lasting and caring relationship for everyone with the Dear Brothers. Drugs and alcohol were really not part of the picture. I'm glad to say that. And the biggest taboo was smoking. Smoking was prohibited within a 2-block radius of the school, and 1 week suspensions were doled out if caught. No excuses were ever entertained. Central had 2 main venues to keep everyone in line: sports and the Friday night dances. If you didn't make the varsity team, like me, I did make varsity for track. I was a shot putter, okay. And you automatically became an ardent fan and loved attending every sports event while cheering your heart out. Sitting next to a cute honey rapidly became an accepted pastime, especially with someone you met at the Friday night dances. The Friday night dances at Central Auditorium became a must-attend event. Hundreds of kids from Central and the neighboring high schools religiously attended. Rock and roll music made its everlasting entry during the 1950s, and memories of being right in the middle of it persist to me today. Young girls now started taking a more prominent place in one's life, and the Central dances were the catalyst for just that. Some of us missed our lifetime sweetheart, but that's another very long story. Reluctantly, I'm ending this brief snippet lest I go on and on. Well, I've decided to go on and take a back step into my past and review my school years. My earliest memory of school was being dropped off by my mother's at the Venerini Nursery on Garden Street in Lawrence. At 4 years old, the only person I knew was my cousin Tommy Teresi, son of Sandy and Tom. Here's an author's note. There were so many Tommy Teresis that were named after their grandfather that you usually refer to them by their mother's names. There was Sandy's Tom, Effie's Tom, Angie's Tom, etc. I don't remember much about the nursery other than a lot of kids crying during the day. The Dear Sisters were really saints. I remember the name of one of them, who was simply marvelous. During my nursery school year, the country was still in the midst of World War II, if you could believe it. And I still remember blackouts, rationing tokens, as well as VE and VJ Day. During the war, my father worked at the Charleston Navy Yard building destroyers and other ships. I remember visiting the Navy Yard on my 5th birthday with my father and my Uncle Joe. Somehow they obtained permission to bring a kid into the yard. I think my love of ships and anything naval started with that visit. Enrollment into the pre-primary at Holy Rosary Grammar School followed my stint with the Venerinis. It was a whole new world, and the strong common trait was that all the kids were of Italian descent. You didn't go to Holy Rosary if you weren't Italian. However, there was a clear demarcation between the Sicilians and the Napolitanos. But that's a long, complicated story I'm not going to go into. There was one kind nun in charge of the new arrivals, and her name was Sister Dolores. She was sweet, petite, and infinitely patient, and her memory will stay with me forever. As one of the cadre Notre Dame nuns at Holy Rosary, she started us all on the road to learn how to read and write. The 2nd grade introduced me to the Palmer method of cursive writing, where before you wrote anything, one went through a series of warm-up exercise of doing round whirling circles or straight lines up and down. Some of these people are nodding their heads. Okay, of course, the upper right-hand corner of any blank sheet of paper had the initials JMJ, meaning Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. This practice continued all the way through Central Catholic High School. Whatever the nuns did in teaching us how to write clearly and legibly really worked. Even today, I take pride in writing my signature that after 80 plus years remains my personal hallmark. And who can forget the famous multiplication table? It was tattooed onto one's brain and remained as a living testimony of the fine works that the nuns did in educating us. I'm sure you all remember the multiplication table. 8 times 9? There you go, you're right on there. Okay. The grammar school years flew by with the speed of light, and they provided lasting memories, like the May procession that wound its way through the streets every May. Christmas plays provided entertainment for our parents each December. The big deal each year was, of course, the Feast of the Three Saints, held over the Labor Day weekend. Saturday night started with fireworks in Tripoli Bakery's parking lot, followed by a torchlight parade which culminated at the corner of Newbury and Common as 3 bands met. Viva San Alfio was the cry. Common Street had all sorts of food stands selling such exotic delicacies as crispellis, that's a gooey sort of dough with an anchovy in the center, pizza, Italian meat pies, spumoni, gelato, all sorts of pastries and treats. At the corner of Union and Common Street was a large temporary bandstand which blared all kinds of Italian songs all night. For a 12-year-old kid with friends roaming up and down Common Street was heaven on earth. Sunday morning started with a 10 o'clock solemn high mass at the Holy Rosary Church. During Mass, an Italian band was blaring outside. I believe my cousin Jenny and her husband Faye were married at the 10 o'clock St. Alfio. At 3 p.m., the high point of the weekend started with the statues of the 3 saints being pulled up onto a ramp, onto a cart called the Varo. A huge quantity of large firecrackers was set off as the statues reached their apex. The cart now started a slow procession pulled through the streets for the next 3 or 4 hours, while people offered money to the saints, which was pinned to their sashes. Each time a large bill was offered, the men riding on top of the Varo would yell, "Viva San Alfio," and the band would play a large crescendo. Of course, the bigger the dollar amount, the louder that the band played. You gave a 50, and I'm telling you, they'd have you dancing through the streets. As the carts passed through the streets, mortars filled with rolled paper streamers would be set off, showering the crowd. Large mortars also shot paper spears into the sky, which exploded and released a parachute with an Italian flag. I remember my wife and I chased it with our car. She was walking out the window, and we finally found it in somebody's backyard up on Prospect Hill. The streets were literally filled with streamers and confetti. By 6:30, the Varo was back about a block from the church, and there the procession reached its high point. Thousands of people surrounded it as the 2 Italian bands competed on who could play the loudest. Hundreds of balloons were released into the air as dozens of mortars positioned on the roofs of the surrounding tenement houses spewed out literally hundreds of pounds of colored papers, along with the release of a dozen doves. Actually, they were pigeons. It took about an hour for the procession to inch its way back to the church, and with the last flurry of paper streamers, the 3 saints were lowered back into the church to wait another year before a repeat performance took place. Another must-do summer activity was you attend the fireworks at the Lawrence Stadium. I think some of you guys still do that, don't you? Go to the fireworks on the eve of 4th of July. And of course, a visit to Canopy Lake Amusement Park. I had my first ride on a roller coaster there when I turned 10. It was 2 minutes of pure terror, and it conditioned me for the much bigger ride at Salisbury Beach. One of the rides my folks came along with was the speedboat ride around the lake. Valentine's Day, I'm coming to the end, by the way, folks. Valentine's Day provided the Dear Nuns with a great platform for raising money for the missions in Africa. Pinking shears shaped wallpaper into cute hearts onto which a holy picture was stuck. Pupils would purchase a wide variety of valentines, ranging from a small penny size to a multi-page diamond. For kids in the 3rd grade, a dime is considered big money. Of course, the big ones were reserved for special kids in your class. Signed and addressed cards were placed on the large box. Some were left unsigned. Tensions rose on Valentine's Day as the box was opened and the cards distributed. It was crushing to count up one's cards and find that they numbered less than the number of my class size. But that's another gang. Maybe a bigger take next year. And to supplement the cash flow to missions, each classroom had a small statue of a black Jesus. They called it the Black Sambo. His hands were held and held a slotted tray into which a coin would be dropped, causing the statue's head to move back and forth in a thank you gesture. I wonder where all these black symbols went. Classroom routines, again, for each grade included students distributing books, writing paper and drawing sheets, again, filling inkwells and a variety of other tasks that kept the classroom buzzing. The nuns could dream up a number of chores to perform during the class. The last bell meant that the chosen few went about dusting routine, emptying waste paper baskets, sweeping the classroom floor, dusting the blackboard ledges, and clapping erasers outside. There was no such thing as school busing. On one rainy day, you walked a little bit faster. Foot patrols were established for each neighborhood, and 8th grade boys were given white sashes to make themselves visible as they stopped traffic to allow the patrols to cross the busy streets. Many kids went home for lunch. I remember going to my grandmother Ida's home on some Fridays when my mother didn't make me a tuna sandwich. She lived at 99 Newbury Street, and her 3rd floor apartment was 2 blocks from school. I'd stop at Ganges Fish Market and buy 20 cents worth of French fries. I hated fish at that time, and at that point in my life. A banana supplemented the French fries, and a glass of milk rounded off a well-balanced, nourishing meal. It was always something to do at Nana's, like emptying the drip pan under the ice box. Folks would put out a card with the word ice in their windows. It was a signal for the Iceman, who plied the back alleys of the neighborhood, to deliver blocks of ice to regular customers twice a week for their ice boxes. I remember as a kid eating small chips of ice from the truck. God knows where that ice was harvested. Most likely it came from Searles Pond on Jackson Street. Other alley vendors included the night sharpening man who would sharpen household knives on a foot-powered grindstone. The old man was summoned with a red card in the windows with the word fuel. Each tenement house had dirt floors in the cellars with chicken wire enclosures for each family that contained the 200-gallon range oil tanks. A weekly chore was to transfer oil from the big tank into glass jugs and haul them up to a storage area in each apartment. Where was OSHA when we needed them? And of course, one of my favorite alley vendors was the ragman. He drove a horse-drawn wagon and bellowed the words, "Ah, rags," to summon out the Nanas and others who sold their old rags for 2 cents a pound. Another interesting thing about the cellars in the tenement house was their electric lighting. Each chicken wire enclosure had a 25-watt bulb with a pull chain for illumination. There was no natural lighting, and a visitor was usually given 2 matches. One was to be used to find your way to the family enclosure, unlock it, pull the light chain before the match burned out. The other, second match, was reserved for a return trip up the stairs. The cellar also provided hosts to an annual event for most families. The making of wine was a sacred ritual usually carried out by my uncles under the watchful eyes of my Nando Ned. A great press was assembled prior to the delivery of what seemed to me hundreds of cases of grapes. I can still smell the pungent sweet odor. The grapes were dumped into the wine crusher, and my uncles turned the screw that brought down a piston that crushed the grapes. Juice ran to the bottom and collected in the container for transfer to waiting 75-gallon wooden wine barrels. One barrel was reserved for my grandfather, and the other was divided amongst my uncles. Over the next several months, the grape juice was transformed into the nectar of the gods as it fermented. The finished wine was transported by my grandpa up to my grandfather's flat in glass gallon jugs. My nana didn't like sweets. Instead, prior to a meal, he would cut up a fruit into a glass, which was then topped off with wine. This served as the dessert on a regular basis. Other than that glass of wine with meals and the wine-soaked fruit, I never saw him drink anything else. My grandfather, Ned, died at the age of 80 when I was 8. I still have a very vivid memory of him with his snow-white hair and mustache. He worked in the woolen mills, and his job was to manhandle the 300-pound bales of wool shipped from New Zealand and the rest of the world. The warehouse where we worked was across the street from us, next to the Knott Canal. He was as strong as an ox, and he had muscles to spare gained from his work. Of my 4 grandparents, who all came from Sicily, he was the only one that became a naturalized citizen. He knew the Constitution very well and could recite the capital of all 48 states. My dear grandmother, Agatha, or Tudda, died at the age of 78 when I was 11. She was really, I get choked up when I remember that. A more loving and caring woman never entered my life till my wife Louise. I'll segue to her love story later. Have a great afternoon.